Thank you so much, Emily. Wow, 6 years, that feels like a lifetime ago, and time flies. And it's been amazing to watch you and many of the other people I know through this group just grow in their careers. So I am truly honored to be here today. For those of you who do not know me very well, I am Caitlin. I am Dallas-based, soon to be Rhode Island-based. My husband and I are moving, but I will stay a part of the Dallas community, and that is where the majority of my work is based out of. So I'm going to get my screen sharing going so that everyone can see those slides. Can everyone see that okay? Yep, getting some nods. Okay, great. Awesome. Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about my background, but tonight we're going to be talking about, navigating the whole salary negotiation mumbo jumbo everyone hates and we all have to deal with. We're going to try and take the fear out of talking money and empower you with a couple of tips and tricks. But first, introductions. So like Emily mentioned, I am Caitlin Studley Potter. My background is in, I'm a career changer myself. I used to be a claims adjuster. I used to be the person who would climb on your roof to inspect hail damage. And I pivoted out of that into tech and have been very blessed with a career where I have been able to empower a lot of people in their careers since moving into technical recruiting. I've worked at some coding boot camps, which is where I met Emily and a couple of other individuals. I've also worked in-house as director of people operations for an agency here in Dallas. And now I own my own business where I do career coaching, recruiting, and HR consulting. So I have the absolute joy of working with people in their careers and helping empower them in a lot of these areas, like talking about salary negotiations. I've worked with several people on resumes, interview prep, job search strategy, all that kind of stuff. It's really my bread and butter. There is nothing I love more than watching someone just sort of transform and then thrive in their career. And I could make you all blush with the wonderful things that I've seen you accomplish and achieve in your careers in here. I will not do that tonight, but my goal is to give you just sort of a teaser, right? This is not going to be like the be all end all of salary negotiation information, but this is going to be sort of the sort of salary negotiation 101. And then we're going to have a really awesome raffle where I will be raffling off some signed copies of some books that are a really great resource and sort of help create the roadmap for this to be a jumping off point for you to do some exploration in your salary negotiation. So we can get started. So you've landed an interview. Now what? Now comes the dreaded question. Who wants to unmute and tell me what you're getting asked by a recruiter? What's the question they ask you that you don't want to answer? Someone give it to me.
What's your salary?
What are your salary requirements? And this is how we all respond, right? I don't know. Why are you asking me that? I don't know. What should I say? This is awkward. We have that internal sweaty, panicky, gross feeling, worried about a whole bunch of things, right? Sitting there wondering, how the heck am I supposed to answer this? I feel like no matter what I say, it's going to be the wrong thing, right? What are some of our fears? What if we ask for too little? What if we lowball ourselves? 70,000, and then you find out later the range started at 90,000. You're like, oh, crap. Why the heck did I say that? What if you ask for too much? What if you confidently say 150,000 and they go, oh, we were only thinking 125. We don't want to interview you anymore, but that's a company you really want to work for, right? Gross, awful. Not sounding confident in your ask, right? Early on in my career, I had this happen to me. Someone asked me for the number. I gave the number, and I had a friend who knew the person who asked, and I got feedback that I didn't sound confident in my ask, so he didn't believe me. And I was like, oh, that's a good piece of feedback. I guess I need to practice saying that number. So we might not sound confident, right? That's shaky. That might make the interviewer doubt that you're actually worth that amount if you can't confidently say it, right? Maybe getting knocked out of the process for your ask, but not knowing that that's the reason, right? We don't always get feedback from recruiters and hiring managers. That's not something you're necessarily going to know. So if you either lowball yourself, they might think you're too junior. If you overshoot it, they're like, well, they're too expensive. I don't want to talk to them. So it's tricky, right? We don't know the company's pay bands. We're not there yet. Colorado's there. Colorado is requiring companies to publish their salary bands in their job descriptions. So there's a beacon of hope. The Women Who Code job board has companies publish what the pay is, which is a wonderful thing. It's truly a wonderful thing because information is power, right? And we have the ability to self-select out or in if we know what the pay range actually is. And then again, not knowing which end of a range to ask for, right? Even if you get the range, sometimes we don't always know immediately where we fall within that or what to ask for. And just generally, I have no idea what the heck to do or how to talk about money with this person, right? I just don't even know what to say. Is there anything else that comes up when people ask you this question that maybe is not on this list that anybody wants to share, chat, or on mic? Or anything based on your experiences? No, everyone's staring. Okay, that's okay. Just checking in. So what's the best way for you to try and respond to this question, right? The goal in salary negotiations is to try and flip this script a little bit. Exactly, Leslie, nailed it, right? We flip it around on them. What's your company's budget for this position? So if they come at you and they say, what are your salary requirements? You volley it right back to them. What's your company's budget? What's the pay band for this position look like? Right? This can get into a little bit of a volley. Yeah, it looks like we've got the chat going. Everyone's saying, what's it called when you feel all of this? Maybe Tina syndrome for Bob's Burgers, when you just feel overwhelmed and you're just feeling the, we'll call it Tina syndrome, when you feel all of those things at once. But this is the strategy that I encourage my clients to employ, right? What is your company's budget for the position? Put it back on the recruiter. I will say, even just a couple years ago, this strategy did not work as well. We are making progress as a society and in industry, and as HR professionals. Recruiters are getting better with this question. When they ask you what your salary requirements are, they are asking you because they're trying to figure out if you are within their budget, right? They're trying to not show all of their cards, and you are conversely not trying to show all of your cards. So when you volley it back and ask them, what's your company's budget for this position? Nowadays, you may be surprised at how many companies are willing to actually share that information. I know because I've talked to a few of you about your interviewing experiences lately, and I think some of you have been surprised when you put that question back. It's very scary the first couple times you do it. It is very uncomfortable because you're basically turning it around on the recruiter and going, no, your turn. You have to tell me. So when you ask them what's your company's budget for this position, a couple things can happen, right? They can answer, that's the goal. Hopefully they will say, well, the range for this position, depending on experience, is $80,000 to $100,000. Great. Now, they may ask you for a number again. That's okay. What we can do is say, I'm happy to interview and explore this, but that range feels appropriate for where I feel my skill set sits. And so I would love to continue this conversation, and we can get to a number together that we feel like is a good match based on my level of experience and the role itself, right? But sometimes you might end up with I'll survey the audience if anyone wants to give me an answer. What are some of the rebuttals you've gotten when they've tried to kick it back to you? When you say, what's your company's budget for the position? What are some of the answers that you get if they don't want to tell you what the number is? Does anybody have any recent examples?
I just got one, a really interesting one.
Yeah.
The lady got all complicated and she was like, well, it depends on where you live, depends on the experience, depends on some number. I have to do some deep in calculations to really tell you a number. And I was like, whoa. She didn't give me a number.
She's like, I have to take out my scientific calculator and plug in a formula. I'll get back to you. Yeah, okay, so yep. It depends on experience. We can talk about that more during the interview process. That's a very common one, right? Sometimes you might get, we don't have a budget. That's also not not uncommon. They may just come right back at you and say, we don't know what the budget is yet, but what are your salary requirements? They may just ask you again, right? Sometimes get into this sort of awkward back and forth. You end up caught in the middle of, you're both trying to force it out of each other. And then, yeah, very much the other bullet point I had was just, we really like to feel people out and then determine the salary range. That can often be a red flag. Use your discretion, but if they really have no idea what they're going to pay you, that's probably not a good sign, because it means they don't have good pay parity in their organization, right? They should have some idea when they are hiring someone in, they should have an idea of what the ballpark is for someone to work in their organization salary wise, right? It shouldn't just be like, we're pulling a number out of a hat, or tell me how much it's going to cost and I'll pay you that. It doesn't work like that if you want a fair and equitable organization. So those are some things to keep in mind. If they do try to force it out of you, hold your ground. Don't show your cards, right? You don't have to. You can say, I'm happy to explore this role further. And we can discuss, if this is going to be a good fit. Or you can continue to press on them and sort of play the game back to them and say, I'm happy to continue the conversation as long as I still feel like this is worth our time, but it would be helpful to me if you'd provide a pay band so that I could get an idea of how you're valuing this role, right? It's not as simple as they want to give you a number, they want to shake a number out of you, right? Because a role at one organization is not the same pay band necessarily as a role at another organization, right? Working at a small business that only has a couple of people might be a very different set of responsibilities than going to work for Amazon. And you can't have a range that's exactly the same for every single role. And that's why it's important, we'll talk a little bit more about this, to do some research, to have conversations with people. But it's important to sort of hold this back for as long as you can as the candidate, and not, I hate to make it sound like we're playing games, which is why I hope in a year or two that this talk maybe is useless, in the sense that we have more information about pay bands. I hope we all become more like Colorado and publish this information, because it's really silly to me that it is such a game. But especially as women, as basically anybody who is not a straight white male, we are all at a disadvantage, right? We have to do everything that we can to try and fight for the money that we deserve. And companies will always do what they can to try and get people usually for the lowest amount possible, right? So that's why it's important for us to ask, to fight, to have data, and go to the table with something. So if you can try and refrain. I will tell you, there are going to be times where a recruiter will trip you up in a conversation, and sometimes you'll just blurt out a number, and that's okay. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. If you feel like they're really forcing a number out of you and it's a job you are really interested in, it's okay. If you blurt out a number or you blurt out a range, it's totally okay. If you feel like they're forcing your hand, it's okay to share a number. And we'll talk about how you can handle that later down the line if you learn some more information and you feel like that number is not super accurate. But you should have cards, right? So don't show them all if you can help it, but get your data ready, right? Start getting a list of your accomplishments ready, right? We can't just throw numbers out and go, I want to be paid $150,000, right? Someone's going to go, well, why? Why should I pay you that? We can't just throw those numbers out there. We have to have some data, right? So these are some of the sources of data that we can go and reference. And just as a note, don't panic or feel like you're welcome to screenshot this, but don't panic and feel like you have to save all this information. Excuse me. I'm going to have a link at the end that's going to be a landing page that has all of these links and resources that'll be available to you. So just enjoy the talk. Don't stress about taking notes or anything like that. These are some really great resources that provide insight into pay bands, pay scales, especially as it relate to different areas, right? So a few of these were mentioned in the Slack channel. Just a quick plug for the Slack channel. It's a great resource. We actually had a conversation in the Slack channel about a week or two ago where people were sharing salaries. And that was a really useful data point for a lot of people who were trying to figure out, am I paid fairly? Am I being underpaid? Do I need to go to bat for myself and ask for a raise? But these are some really good websites and resources that you can use. I'm going to give a quick plug for the Robert Half salary report. That one is pretty comprehensive. So you can go in and you can select by job title, location, it gives you a pretty good idea of just the ballpark that you should be looking at, especially if, we have people from all over the country listening tonight. So it's a really useful data point just to get some ideas of, these are companies that Robert Half is working with and they are surveying, and these are what these companies are paying people. And so these are actual data points. So if you get lowballed by a company, you can literally send the recruiter the report and say, hey, listen, this is where the midpoint is, or this is where the higher end is. I have actual data to show you that I think this should, the budget for this should be higher if it's worth your time and salt to do that, right? If you're really having a fight with a company over salary and you're very, very far off, only fight for it if it's really worth your time. If it's your dream job and you're trying to make it work, go for it. But ultimately, the best companies are going to be doing regular compensation analyses, and they're going to be updating their pay bands regularly to be competitive within the marketplace. So I would just caution you, if you have to fight super hard, that may not be the best business for you, because if a company really wants you, they're going to show you that they want you. But it's really useful to review this data and have this information going into an interview. The tricky part with this can be sometimes, especially with technology, if there are newer technologies that are coming out, or even newer roles that are coming out, you can't always get exactly what you're looking for, right? And a good example of this right now is the UX world. With UX, it's starting to get a little hairy just because there's a lot of different job titles, a lot of different very specified skill sets, and a lot of companies are calling their jobs by different names. So it can be a little tougher to go in and say, okay, it's specifically this thing. And to some extent, we're seeing that with data science as well. Data science and data analysis can get a little tricky because a data analyst at one company could be very different than a data analyst at another company, depending on how companies are sort of qualifying those skill sets. So I would say just take all of this information with a grain of salt. Mostly with software development, it's pretty reliable, pretty straightforward. But that's why it's helpful to have different data points. And it's important to interview, right? This is why coaches, if you talk to any coach or really anybody who's a proponent of really keeping up with this stuff, they will tell you that you should interview regularly. And I know we have some proponents of that in the Slack channel as well, in the DFW community. You have to interview regularly, whether you're job searching or not. If a recruiter reaches out to you and says, hey, are you interested in this role? Even if you're not interested, if it's been 6 or so months since you've interviewed, just say yes and do the interview and find out what the salary range is. Find out what you're worth. What is someone willing to pay you if you would take this job? And then make a note of that. That's a data point so that when you go to your next raise, when you have that meeting, you have a data point to say, hey, I've been approached and they're talking about this salary range. That's a really, really useful data point. It's also just good for your self-confidence, right? Because then you know, like, hey, if I get unhappy here, I know I can walk out the door and go get money somewhere else, more money somewhere else. So talk to your colleagues, especially your male colleagues, ask them how much they're making, right? I'm not saying you have to like walk up to somebody one day and just be like, hey, Joe, tell me how much they pay you here, but build that confidence and trust with your colleagues and have those conversations. Those people are likely to be your advocates, or you could advocate for them, right? So I, at a business that I worked at, I worked on a compensation analysis, and I was lucky enough to be able to institute some pay parity because I saw that there were discrepancies when people were coming in the door, and we had some gender inequality, we had some disparities across experience levels. And so I was able to go out to the marketplace, get some solid data, and come back and say, okay, we have to restructure these, we have to get people raises, we have to level the playing field and make sure everybody is being treated fairly based on their experience and their progress. That's a really great thing to be able to do. And as a colleague, if you're able to offer somebody some of that insight and then maybe share some of these resources with them and say, hey, here's how we can approach this, right? Because it's not as simple as going to your boss and saying, hey, I found out Joe makes more than me. Can I have that much too? That strategy doesn't usually work. It's more, hey, I've done some research. I would like to talk about, revisiting the pay band and figuring out how I can get on par with any of my other colleagues if they're more senior than me. There are different ways to have that discussion, but being empowered with that information can be really helpful because you can also have colleagues who will advocate, to hiring managers or just generally for that type of pay parity in your environment. So, and then of course, there's some really cool companies. I don't know, have any of you ever looked at the Buffer salary page? Buffer posts all their salaries online. No. Okay, that's a good one. It's going to be on the landing page I'll share with you, but there are some companies like Buffer. For anybody who doesn't know what Buffer is, they're a social media publishing platform. So, you can go in and schedule all your posts across your platforms. They are all about pay transparency to the max. So they actually have, if you go on their website, you can see what every single person, including the CEO, makes at their company, which to me is wildly refreshing. They also share their formula for how they pay individuals. So if you are being hired in, they'll share the specific formula that they're using in order to calculate what the salary is going to be. And everyone's salaries are published. So there's no argument over, who is being paid what and why. It's all out there in the open, which to me is very refreshing. And I hope that's the direction that we're moving in. Oh, awesome. Thanks for posting that, Emily. Appreciate it. Super interesting to look at. Very inspirational company. They're setting a great bar. There's a couple of other ones that are talking about it. Starbucks and Whole Foods are ones that come up when you talk about pay transparency. I can't speak specifically. I wasn't able to find a ton of data on the actual publishing, but I know that they're trying to be more transparent about some of the data. Starbucks is claiming that they've achieved pay parity across their organization. I think, gender and otherwise, but those are some good companies to keep an eye on. The Buffer stuff is just really cool. So definitely keep an eye on them. Just sort of a brief side note, and I've got this article linked later, but this is a quote from the Harvard Business Review, and it says, women get a nervous feeling about negotiating for higher pay because they are intuiting correctly that self-advocating for higher pay would present a socially difficult situation for them, more so than men. And so this is a reality that we're up against, right? So we have to figure out win-win strategies in the negotiation process to be able to advocate for ourselves and overcome some of those social hurdles that we face, right? When we negotiate, people think that we're aggressive, that we're asking for too much, right? There's a lot of negative stigma that comes with us trying to ask for money, what we deserve, right? You've all worked hard in your careers. It's not an easy path to get to where you are, to learn that technical expertise and employ it effectively in a workplace. So that's why we have to collect all those data points to be able to present an objective sense of why we're worth that amount, instead of it feeling like it's anything tied to emotion or anything like that. And that's awesome. So Katie says she works for Paravita Solutions, and they're great about salary transparency too. So that's awesome. Katie, do you want to elaborate anything on that?
Sure, I can elaborate a bit. Yeah, this is easier than typing it out, but essentially we have different, I guess, levels of experience that you get hired into. So there's consultants, associates, managers, principals, VPs, et cetera, and there's different levels within that. And for every single one of those levels, anybody in the company can see what the salary is for that. And it's a regular promotion schedule for everybody. So every year you're up for a promotion. And so it's very structured in making sure that everybody can progress at the same time. And within the company, like I said, you can see what every single person makes.
That's awesome. Fantastic. Thanks for sharing. I appreciate that. I think this is exactly the type of stuff we need to be doing, right? Talking about the companies who are doing it well and maybe shunning the ones who aren't. Awesome. So another important thing to remember in all of this, right? This is only your first interview. You don't have all the information yet, right? Whether this is a phone screen, a message, whatever. If you blurt out a number, it is okay to revise your ask upon learning more information. You are not tied to the number. And we had this conversation. I actually think this topic may have been what the reach out point was when Johanna reached out to me after, because we had this happened to someone in the Slack channel. We had this discussion where somebody had been approached by a recruiter. They gave a general range, and then they interviewed for the role and got all the way through the interviews, and they were like, oh, I totally lowballed myself. What do I do? And we talked through this, right? You don't have to stick to that number. At any point when you've learned more information, it is totally okay to go back and have that conversation and say, When I first gave you that number, that was based on what I thought this role was. Now that I have all the information, I think it should be this number, and here's why, right? Or if they come to you with an offer and it's lower than you think it should be, you always have that option. That's a really important thing to remember. You are not tied to the original number that you gave. It feels, again, these things, they sound super simple when I say them out loud, like, of course you're not. But then when you've already had that conversation and the recruiter calls you, and they're like, all right, yeah, so we're good at 80. And you're like, throw up. No, we're not good at 80. I'm terrified that you're going to not offer me the job if I ask for money. It feels super high stakes, right? So what you have to do is you have to take a deep breath and say, I'd love to chat about this with you, because after this interview process, I realized some things. I realized this role is going to require more leadership experience than I originally thought that it would. It's going to require more project management skills than I thought that it was, in addition to my development skills. And so I'd like to revisit this number and factor those things in and get to a number that works for both of us, right? That is a great way to have that conversation. You always want to position it as, how can we both make this a win? How can we get this to be a win from your side and a win from my side? But don't ever feel like you're trapped in a number, even if, and especially if they tell you it's the top of the range. Well, I can only go to 90. Okay, so what else can we negotiate? How can we make this a win? Okay, don't let them shut the door on the conversation, because that's all negotiation is. It's just a conversation. It is just a conversation, and you have just as much power as the other person does, even if it doesn't feel like that. So those are important things to remember. But what if I'm already in my job and I want a raise? How the heck do I negotiate a salary, right? I see some smiles and some nods. I know some of you are thinking this. Some of you are already feeling empowered. You'll get a raise. My meeting's scheduled. I'm getting a raise. So in-house, right? Again, you got to have the data. You have to have the research. What have you accomplished? What's your business value, right? Keep a list of your accomplishments. Figure out how much your colleagues are making. Get some data points here so that you have some information, right? Again, we're not going to the boss and saying, I found out Joe makes more than me. I want as much as him. Useful data point. Let's figure out what is the pay band for this role look like? If I want to be making 90 and I'm making 80 today, what can I do? How are you qualifying someone who's making 90, right? Work backwards from that number and be able to show them. They say, oh, well, you need to be doing X, Y, and Z like Joe is. And you go, oh, I'm doing X, Y, and Z. Great, now you have a case, right? So start from that point and work backwards to build that picture so that they basically can't say no to you, right? But getting that information, having those transparent conversations with your leaders to figure out what do those pay bands look like and how are they benchmarking your success, those are going to be conversations that will carry you very far within an organization. And if for some reason they're telling you they can't disclose the pay band, just keep asking how this works. How can you get to the place where you want to get? So if they're not going to disclose the pay band to you, figure out what that number is. Okay, well, I think that based on all the market research I've done or the interviews I've been doing, it should be around this number. How can we get there? Because I want to stay here. I'm invested in this company. How can we get to that number? What can I show you and prove to you? Right? One word of caution I give you is try not to weaponize your other offers, right? So don't use it as a tool to threaten your hiring manager or threaten to leave. It's a tool to let them know that you are exploring other avenues and that you know what your worth is. So you can even just say, I've had some other conversations, I've collected some data points, and I do know that my skill set is worth X amount in the marketplace. They will generally assume that means that you have gotten some other offers and that there's stuff on the table. You can be a little vague about it, but don't go in and say, I got an offer for 90 and I'm getting paid 80 here. Like, I want 90 or I'm walking. That's very aggressive. It's probably not going to be an effective negotiation method. I'm laughing, but I've seen lots of people do that and it always backfires. It's basically tantamount to accepting a counteroffer where you're now living on borrowed time, right? If they see that you're thinking about leaving, it becomes a a non-constructive conversation if you weaponize it. It's okay to empower yourself with it, but you have to be constructive with how you explore that. And you're very much within your right to pull the card of, when was the last time that HR did a compensation analysis, right? When was the last time that our pay bands were evaluated against the marketplace? What does that look like? What does pay parity at this company look like? How can I make sure that as a woman, I'm being paid as much as my male colleagues? You don't have to politicize it aggressively, but those are okay questions to ask. How does HR, configure our salary pay bands? What's the formula for how this works? Those are okay questions to ask, but keeping a running list of your accomplishments is always going to be really important. Quantifying your business value, and keep interviewing, right? Super important things. Things you shouldn't forget. You are not powerless. You're interviewing the company as well. I know you all know this because we talk about this all the time, that I feel like every event we talk about that has interview, you have to interview the company as well. And you have the right to back out of a process at any point. Again, this is something that feels really scary when you're interviewing, especially if you're interviewing and you really need a job. I can tell you from personal experience, you'd be surprised sometimes what saying no will do for you in the interview process. I once told an employer no, and they came back and offered me the top of my range. So you never know what's going to happen. I am not guaranteeing you that by any means, but I am telling you anything is possible. But stand your ground, right? You have the right to say no. You have the right to say, I appreciate this, but I don't feel like this range matches my skill set's value. So I'm gonna respect your time, and I'm gonna withdraw from the interview process. Sometimes that will inspire a recruiter to go to bat for you, and they might fight really hard to be able to hire you. So just make sure that you have power. You're not trapped in this process. There will be an employer who comes along who values your skill set, who wants to pay you what you're worth. It's okay to ask for more time. So if you get an offer, sometimes the offer turnaround times are a little bit short and you're trying to consider, or maybe you're in other interview processes. It's always okay to ask for more time for consideration. Always okay to ask for more information, more conversations, more money, everything. I don't remember what my bullet point that says take reviews with a grain of salt is. Not sure. We're going to skip over that one. Don't worry about it. To breathe. Breathing is the most important thing, right? When you get on these phone calls, it feels really scary. And sometimes you start to panic a little bit. Best thing you can do is just take a deep breath and remind yourself, this is only a conversation. Literally put a Post-it note on your computer that says, this is only a conversation. You will face rejection. You will ask for more money. People will tell you no. You have to figure out where your compromises are, right? Only you know what you're willing to take, what your bottom line is. Those are things that you should establish before you go into the interview, right? Don't compromise on anything that you have set for yourself as boundaries. So if you go into this thinking, I'm not going to take anything less than $100,000, even if it's my dream company, put that in writing somewhere so that if you start getting into the grind of the negotiation process and they start throwing numbers around and they say 90 is the best they can do, you need to be able to look at that piece of paper and say, no, 100 is my bottom. If it's not 100, unfortunately, I have to withdraw. Try to remind yourself why, you have the data, you have you've done the research. Don't let people lowball you. It's so hard. It's really hard if you've been laid off, or if you graduated from a boot camp and you're just looking for work. You know what your bottom is. So if your bottom, you come out of boot camp and someone offers you a job for 45,000, if you just need money, that's okay. You're within your right to take whatever. That's totally okay. But know where your bottom is. If they offer you 25, you're probably not going to take it, and that's okay. Don't feel like you have to say yes, but you have to know where your areas of compromise are. And you can negotiate anything. Every single thing is negotiable. Everyone says this, but it really is true. You can negotiate paid time off. You can negotiate hybrid versus remote versus in person. You can negotiate benefits, stipends, bonuses, equity, all of these things. They're all negotiable. So those are important to remember if you get to a place of rejection or you feel like you can't get to an agreement. What other levers can you pull? And then just a couple of quick reminders. We'll finish up with these last couple slides, and I want to save some time for Q&A. So reminders on best practices: let them lead, So try not to lowball yourself if you can help it. It's okay if you throw a number out there, but try not to. Don't share your previous salary info. This is actually illegal in a lot of states now. A lot of states are jumping onto this bandwagon. It's not the majority of states by any means, but in several states, it's actually illegal for them to ask you what you're currently making or ask you for your salary history. So I filled out an application about a year and a half ago with, it was a very extensive job application that asked me for my salary history all the way back, like for my entire life. Like they wanted to know what I made at Dunkin' Donuts when I was in high school. And I was like, this is irrelevant. Like I'm not giving you any of this information. So I just left it all blank. And they asked me why I didn't fill it out. And I told them that I didn't feel it was relevant and that they didn't need to know what I made at previous roles to be effective in this role. And after that, they actually changed their process and they stopped asking people for salary history. So definitely feel empowered for your own best practices and the things you know you shouldn't do and that you don't have to do. Do your research, talk to other people in the field, especially men. Remind yourself that total compensation is greater than salary. So salary is a number, it's an important number, but total comp is a huge piece of this, right? You can negotiate, but parental leave, you can negotiate PTO, you can negotiate 401k contributions, everything is negotiable. So don't forget that. And then the biggest thing is practice with a friend or mentor, right? You have to practice these things. They're uncomfortable to say, it takes practice. I just can't say this enough. Even if you don't have someone to practice with, record yourself saying these things. You have to get them out of your mouth to be comfortable with them. You have to just say them. And you have to be willing to say no. You have to practice what these rebuttals look like. If you don't, you're much more likely to be very nervous and very shaky during those conversations. They're already scary enough, so try to get over that hump. And thankfully, I'm a coach. I'm happy to practice that with you. But it gets a lot easier. The more you do it, the more you practice, it gets a lot easier to say no, to negotiate. Those things get a lot easier. This is sort of my disclaimer every time I do any kind of talk, is just take all advice with a grain of salt, right? At the end of the day, you are the only one who knows what's best for you, for your loved ones, for your family. So don't let anybody berate you because you didn't negotiate your salary. If you got an offer and you said, that's great, that's what I want, and you said yes, that's okay. Don't let anybody beat you up about it. Everyone has a lot of advice and thoughts and feelings in this arena. I am really just a proponent of what can I do to help everyone around me be their best self, get what their value is, right? But don't ever let anybody bully you. If you're in a conversation like, well, you didn't negotiate, it's like, you're always going to do what's best for you. So if taking the 45K offer is the right thing for you right now, that's okay. You do what's best for your family. Or if just negotiating is super uncomfortable for you and you don't want to do it, that's okay too. These are just tools and advice for things to try so that you can make sure that you're reaching your earning potential for what's fair for your market value of your skill set. But at the end of the day, you do know what's best for you. So take all advice with a grain of salt always. So that is what I got. I want to open it up for some Q&A before we do some raffling. But again, this is intended to be like quick and dirty tips and tricks for salary negotiations. Really empower you to volley that back to the recruiter, not give your numbers, but happy to answer any questions. And I'll rely on the leadership team to cut me off when we need to do some raffling. So anything or anyone's welcome to share a win or a struggle as well. If anybody has any recent experiences, I welcome you. If you want to celebrate yourself, please use this as an opportunity to do that as well. I'm always happy to congratulate anybody if they've had some success with any of these strategies, or if anybody just wants to share a win, they're proud that they advocated for themselves.
Hi, my name is Sonia. I have a question. So yeah. I've been interviewing, and one of my first interviews, we're about at the offer stage tomorrow. I talk with HR, and I said, as long as everything goes well in my technical interview, they're going to review, I will have an offer, but I still want to continue on with my other interviewing processes. So if I do get an offer, how do I politely say, can I take the time? I don't want to give off vibes that I'm not interested, and I still want to have that as a possibility because I love the company and what they're doing, but I just have a lot of really great interviews coming up as well. How do I?
That's a great question.
Navigate that. Yeah, thank you.
It can definitely, yeah, of course. It could definitely be tricky. It depends a lot on the company and sort of their sense of urgency for the role. So Unfortunately, some companies will really just force your hand and they'll say, we can only give you 48 hours. And after that, the offer expires. That kind of stinks. The best companies who really are invested in you are going to want to give you the chance to take the time. So I always recommend approaching it from a place of letting them know that you're serious. So telling them something along the lines of like, this, I am very seriously considering this offer. But in order to be thorough and make sure it's the right decision and the right fit for me, I'm wondering if you might allow me a little bit more time than maybe you normally give candidates so that I have some time to reflect and really make sure that this is the right fit for me. So I go with the angle of asking them like, how much time can you afford to give me, and sort of put it back in their court to feel them out. They may just say like, hey, we just need to, we're trying to hire someone so that they can start by the end of the year or something like that. In which case then, okay, I might be able to get a couple weeks or something like that. Or you can also just lead with your time frame. So you can say like, I need a couple weeks to work out, some things in order to respond to this offer. Is that something that you can give me? Do you have time to be able to give me? One of the best things that I think you can do in the process with a recruiter is be transparent in the process, right? So as a recruiter, I always ask my candidates, I say, I'm not ignorant enough to think that you're not interviewing at other companies. And I know that you are, and we're not the only company who wants you. So I would love if we could be transparent with each other so that we can make this as like positive of an experience as possible, right? And so if I got to that point where I made an offer and somebody asked for more time, typically what I would come back to them and say, I would say something like, what can I do to improve this offer so that maybe you don't want to continue that interview process with those other companies, right? What can I do to inspire you to take this offer and make us your top choice, right? That's a good recruiter will do that, right? Whether it's money, giving you more time with some team members so you feel like it's the right decision, or some of them might say, okay, we can give you another week or so. So at the end of the day, you will probably have your hand forced and you'll have to make a decision, which kind of stinks because that's the nature of the beast, right? When you're interviewing, nothing ever lines up perfectly, and it can be really, really tricky to time that all well enough. So sometimes you might get down to the wire where you have to just make a call and say yay or nay. If you're going to hedge your bets on future interviews and hope they result in offers, or if you're going to take that one you got. But I will say it never hurts to ask. So if I were you, I would, if they get to an offer stage, I would let them know like, hey, I have a couple of other things in the works. Out of respect, I'd like to see them through. And I'm wondering how much time you might be able to give me to evaluate the offer so I can make the best decision and make sure that this really is the right fit for me, and just see what they say. Most recruiters will be reasonable. And again, I believe that the way a recruiter or a hiring manager or anybody handles these conversations tells you a lot about the company, right? If they're really invested in you, they're probably going to want to give you time because they want to be putting their best foot forward, and they're willing to prove out that they really are the best company, or they're going to ask you how they can make the offer more attractive. If they're like, we need an answer in 24 hours, so if you can't give that to us, then the offer expires. Maybe that's not the company for you because they're being really aggressive and they're not even willing to consider you and the things that you need to, time to discuss it with family or whatever you need. So the hints and the tips are always in the answers and the interactions that you're getting, but it never hurts to ask for more time.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. We've got a question about if anyone has good resources on how to factor in equity and or stock when comparing or considering offers. I am not the best person for that, but the coach that we are raffling a session off with is really great at that. So I would definitely point you towards her resources. Her name is Jacqueline Twilley. I have my next slide is her raffle stuff. But Jacqueline Twilley is amazing. She works primarily with women in male-dominated industries. So I would definitely, she actually just posted today about a package that got negotiated, an offer that was negotiated where they were factoring in some stock and things like that. So she would definitely be a great resource for that. And I'm sure she has some stuff for that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So how do you negotiate when, like, for example, I have experience on the tech industry for already like 5 years as an engineer and so on. What if, I'm sure you've seen it, how like the tech industry, like a lot of people jump around like different areas. Like I've seen engineers going to design, I've seen engineers going to product management and all that. How do, like, you have no experience about that. However, you do have the experience on the tech industry. So how do you negotiate that? So like, you don't start like really like, hey, like a bootcamp graduate, like, hey, I just learned this. But no, because like there's some skills that come in there. So I don't know. How do you go about that?
That's a great question. I think open dialogue with that company, right? If you are transitioning, you absolutely do not just throw away all the skills that you have, right? Because the reason you're able to make that transition successfully is because of all the knowledge that you have that came before it and all the things you learned and all the things you learned about learning, right? So nobody can transition and then just expect to start over in terms of salary. And I know the bootcamp industry is a little bit like that, but the way I always approached it with boot camps was not to throw away whatever the previous experience was. It was to empower that individual to utilize that and fight for more money with it, right? Because you're not just getting a software engineer, you're getting a software engineer plus a teacher or whatever. So I think the art of it is to find the compromise, right? So what are you currently worth in your software engineering role, if you're a software engineer or a data analyst or whatever? And then how do you find the compromise of what's the gap between that and then your knowledge? And so sometimes, depending on where you're going, it could potentially mean a slight step back, but I don't think it should ever be this giant disparate thing where, you know, if tomorrow you decide to go into something that's tangential, I do think you should still be able to hold your ground pretty solidly. But I think it requires an open dialogue to discuss that exact thing, to say, I realize that I don't have all the knowledge in this thing, but I am coming with a wealth of knowledge in this thing. And this is still going to greatly benefit the organization. And here's all the perspective that I have to offer and why I'm even more of an attractive candidate. So how can we find the middle ground between I'm not starting from scratch, but I'm also not an expert, and how do we sort of rectify that? So I think open dialogue is really the only way that you can sort of achieve that. But I do think you have to fight super hard for yourself, because they can't discount all the experience and the wealth of knowledge that you have coming from where you're coming from. And I think it's really, really important to fight for that. But I would just try to remain flexible in the exploration of what that could look like, and try to get a sense of, okay, what does the pay band look like for that role? And how can I sort of best position myself to slot into it and then make a case for it, right? So maybe I'm not a 100% data analyst yet, but I have these other skills. So these skills are worth this. The data analyst is worth this. What's the gap in between those? And how do we find maybe a sweet spot in between that feels like it's a good fit and it's fair for everybody, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah,
I have a question,
sure.
or I guess, yeah, a question, I guess. So I recently, I'm making a transition myself, and I went through the process, and I was trying to get into project management. So I ended up going through the process, getting an offer. Now, at the beginning, the recruiter told me what the pay band was. I said, okay. I said, I'm not fresh out of college, but I'm not, in my mind, I'm like, okay, I'm not fresh out of college, but I'm not, super experienced in this particular role. So he goes, hey, we're trying to find, and I asked him what the range was, and he gave it to me. And then he said, we're trying to find somebody at this particular number. And I said, oh, in my mind, I'm like, that's actually what I'm looking for. Now I go through the process. Like I said, they ended up giving me an offer. So when we spoke over the phone, it was literally 8,000 above what the lowest pay range was. And I thought to myself, I said, well, you told me that it was, that you all were looking for someone in this range. And he goes, well, you don't have tech experience. And I said, but I do have those transferable skills, and the actual project management experience is just not, in that particular field. So I ended up not accepting the offer, but I guess, is there a way, in the future, to kind of maneuver something like that if it does happen? Because I felt like they were trying to lowball me.
Yeah, yeah. Again, I think it comes back to sort of the data points, the research, but I think too, sometimes what you can do is sort of point it back to them and say, well, why don't you feel like you know, I'm a match for that number, and sort of make them explain themselves, because sometimes they may talk themselves out of their own rationale, which is the ideal scenario, because you can sort of point out their contradictions. But I do think sort of pointing back to that initial conversation and saying, hey, when we first spoke, we discussed this number. And then it sort of feels like you're, changing the goalpost now. We discussed this number. I felt confident that that was a good match for my skill set. You're now saying that it's not. So I would love some specific feedback on why not. And then, if it's something that you are interested in, I would, even if you're not going to take it, it might be interesting to explore and say, okay, if I were to take this offer, what does it look like to have a probationary period of, make a suggestion, say, okay, if I were to take this role, what if we set up a probationary period where within 3 months, I'm eligible for that raise based on criteria that we agree upon, right? So if maybe you can get your foot in the door, but you set up specific guidelines for how you can achieve that number. I've also worked with candidates where I've done that. I had a bootcamp grad that I worked with. They went into software development and then they switched to project management. So we were in that very scenario that we're talking about, right? Someone transitioning. And so they were talking, they came from like sort of junior to mid developer, then they transitioned to project management. And so we were trying to figure out, okay, where does this person fit? And it was very much like, okay, let's take their transferable skills. Let's take this stuff. Let's find the sweet spot in the middle and we'll try and come to an agreement. And it was a little bit of give and take on each side. So the agreement we ended up with was they would come in at one number, but we had a 6-month plan in writing for them to have a review period. And if they had met the criteria that we set out in writing, they'd be eligible for the raise to get to the number that they wanted to get to. So that can be a really good compromise. If they're really, they're really going, well, we're not confident. And you're like, I really am, I'm worth this money. If you can't get to that, that can be a good compromise. But sometimes walking away can be the right thing. If they're not seeing the value, sometimes it's worth walking away. And if you do anything like a review period where then you're eligible, always make sure you get it in writing. Never trust anybody. Never trust anybody. Always get it in writing so that you have something to show them physically and say, you put this in writing that we were going to have a review and I would be eligible if I checked these 3 boxes. Well, guess what? I checked the 3 boxes, so now I would like this amount of money. So just be sure that if you do something like that, you have documentation for it. But I would say you probably made the right call walking away, because it sounds like they weren't really super invested in trying to figure out with you what your skill set was. But I would always encourage the dialogue, right? Companies will try to shut it down, right? A recruiter will come back, well, that's the offer I got, so I can't do anything about it. So just be that annoying, curious toddler. Why can't we do that number? What's the reasoning? What did the hiring manager say? Just come at it from a place of curiosity, force the dialogue, because you might be able to get to an agreement if you sort of push through that awkward barrier of like, we were here, now we're here. Where's the difference? And go back to that, how do we get to a win, right? Just put it back to them. Well, I don't agree with that number. So how can we make this a win? What's the middle ground? Can we get higher? Can we get closer to that number? I think it's always fair to put it back on them and just say, why not? Where are your data points coming from? So I don't know if that helps, but those are some of the things that come to mind.
Okay. Yeah, yes, it does. And I think the other thing that really, and this is a really well-known company, the other thing that didn't sit right with me was the fact that I only interviewed with like another team member and the senior, and I never interviewed with the hiring manager. And I was like, how is he gonna only offer me this, but he never spoke to me? And that, when I really thought about it, I was like, you know what? I don't think this is gonna work. There's something's not right about this team. So
that's one thing I should have had on a slide. Trust your gut. Always trust your gut. If it doesn't feel right, you're probably doing the right thing by trusting your gut. If something feels off, or they feel like they're not giving you a fair shake, just walk. There's other companies out there. It's hard. It's really hard, especially if you're in need of a job and you need money and all these things, but you're often better off if you just trust your gut. So we're proud of you. Way to walk away. Be decisive, fight for what you're worth. Somebody else is gonna see the value and they'll hire you for what you're worth.
Oh yes, I'm in the final rounds for like 3 other positions, so I'm
Yay!
ready.
We're rooting for you. Let us know how it goes.
I will.
Awesome.
I also have a question. So I guess what I'm wondering about is a lot of times when I look at different job descriptions, it'll say we're looking for somebody with 2 years of Java or 3 years of this, and they'll list specific skills and specific amounts of time, I guess, that correspond to them. And I feel like the way my career has gone so far, that's not what my experience looks like. I'm a consultant. I've worked on 4 or 5 different projects in the past year, all with different stacks. And that's still a year of development experience, but it's not a year of one thing that's really easily, I guess, just like listed out on a resume. And so I guess I'm wondering how much those like year requirements really matter, and how to still kind of make it clear that I am qualified, even if it doesn't look exactly like that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think many of the coding bootcamp grads who may be on this call would probably agree that those requirements don't matter at all. Having worked with bootcamp grads for many years, I can tell you, I can't count on both hands because it's so many people who got hired off of postings that said they needed 5+ years and they applied anyways, and then they ended up getting hired. So again, always with a grain of salt. Those are often not written by the hiring manager. They are often pulled offline. Applicant tracking systems often create job descriptions, so you can like pull down like a generic Java developer job description and then sort of tweak it. So the HR person can sort of create something. They might send it to the hiring manager. The hiring manager goes, yeah, that looks fine. They don't really read it. It gets published, and that's the job description that you are working with. I couldn't agree with Emily more. Do not self-exclude unless you feel like something is ridiculously out of your league. And I mean ridiculously by like they're absolutely requiring like a master's degree and you don't have a master's degree, and that's like a hard, fast requirement because they're super corporate. Don't ever, there's no reason not to apply. If you feel like there's even a chance and you feel like you've got, heck, I will even say like a maximum 50%, sometimes even 30. If you have 30% of what they're looking for, go for it. And if you are looking at a job description and they're saying you need 3 years of Java and you're a consultant and you're reading the description, you're like, I can do all that, apply. Absolutely apply. Do not hold back. If you don't have 3 hard years of Java, it doesn't matter. If they're going to interview you and you can answer the questions, that's all that matters. So in the cover letter, you can absolutely reference, I'm a consultant. I work on, I'm working on projects that have to get turned around quickly and they have to have a proven ROI for the client. And so I have the ability to work and learn more quickly than other people do because I'm on one project and I have to learn this stack, and then I'm off that project and I have to go learn this stack. So I can learn things quickly. I can scale up really quickly. So definitely don't self-exclude. A cover letter is a great place to provide context for that if you're worried about it. But I would say make sure the keywords and the tools are on your resume and just apply because it's always worth it. Job descriptions are a very vague guideline. They're very rarely written by the people actually doing the hiring. So they're a guideline. They are not the source of truth about that role. I think most of us could probably say, based on the job descriptions we applied for and the actual job we're doing, if we go back and look, we're like, yeah, that wasn't really that accurate. So go for it, I guess, is our answer, especially if you're a consultant. You've got a lot of good experience that an employer would find very valuable.
That helps a lot. I really appreciate the answer.
Yeah, absolutely. It's scary when you're looking at, you're like, oh, it's like, 8 years of experience. I don't have that. And then sometimes you don't realize how skilled you truly are until you start getting up against other people. Maybe somebody has been doing Java for 8 years, but they've only worked in the same environment and they've never learned anything beyond the one thing they're doing every day, right? It's all relative. So definitely don't self-exclude. I do a quick time check. I don't know. I want to make sure I'm respectful of everyone's time. So I'll check with the leadership team just on timing and sort of where things are.
We have time for another question or so. Johanna, did you have one?
I was saying that we look good on time.
I have a question, although maybe not exactly phrased as a question. And I apologize if you touched on this already, but sometimes I feel like when you're interviewing, there's certain language that the interviewer or recruiter gives that tries to like halt a negotiation before it happens. Like, this is a competitive offer. This is what we can provide based on your location and stuff like that. Having been on the other side of it, are there other phrases like that that are intentionally used to try to like prevent a negotiation from happening that as a candidate you should just straight up ignore?
Oh, that's a good question. So it just made me think of my first job that I took when I was a claims adjuster. When I applied and I got the offer said, this salary is like, this offer is non-negotiable. And I was like, it's crystal clear. So it was just in writing, you cannot negotiate this. The salary is take it or leave it. And I was like, this is an interesting way to start things. So tell me your question again. So you're asking specifically about the language, if there's specific language that should sort of like turn you away from something?
Not turn you away so much as like, I think sometimes me being like empathetic, or I don't know exactly what it is. Maybe it's I'm just shy or afraid, but there's language where a particular example I'm thinking of is a company was in California and they were like, you know, we've done the research. We try to have our first offers as competitive as possible since certain groups of people are less likely to negotiate. Like, we're coming out with our best offer here. And like, for me as a woman, I was like, well, I mean, like, that sounds pretty good. Like, they're saying that they're trying to even the playing field by giving everyone a good offer right off the bat. Then the other part of me is like, wait, no, did I just get played? And so like, I'm just wondering if there are from the inside, like tools, I don't even mean it like maliciously or like with bad intent, but that are used to like persuade someone from entering a negotiation.
Yeah, that's a good question. There's definitely not anything that's sort of like an inside track I can give you. It definitely depends on the company. If a company was really being upfront and transparent about sort of their mission in terms of pay parity and transparency and equity and stuff, I would probably trust them if they say they're coming out with their best offer. But again, I don't think that rules out negotiation, right? If they give you their best offer and you're like, well, that's a good offer, but it's not the offer I wanted, you're still within your right to negotiate. I think actually what that makes me think of is the red flag for me is always when companies are talking so much about their amazing culture. We have such great culture and we have such great benefits. And when the emphasis is purely on that and they keep harping on how great their culture is, sometimes that means that they are factoring their culture in as a piece of their compensation. And I say this from personal experience, and I will only say that and no more. It's a tough thing to overcome when companies believe that their culture is just so beautiful and shiny and everyone should want to be a part of it, that factors into compensation. Personally, as an HR professional, I do not believe that culture factors into compensation in your total benefits package. It is an incentive to want to work at a company, but it is not any part of my total compensation package, right? Because a job to one person could be a different job to another person. Some people really look to work for belonging and connection and friendship and all these other things. Other people, they clock in and they clock out and they're done. So I don't think that you can really factor culture in as something that you can factor into someone's compensation package, their total comp. So I get a little squirrely when I start to see that like super hard pushing on like, you know, we all know we're a family is a huge red flag, but you know, that sort of like big culture push starts to worry me about the offer I'm going to get, that they're going to like discount it because they think it's such a great place to work that I'll take a lower salary just to be a part of it, as if they're doing me a favor, when it's like, no, give me market value. Like this, that's how this works. You give me money, I give you my skill set. The rest is immaterial. But yeah, I don't think that anybody really comes out malicious in most instances. I'm sure there are some shady recruiters who've got some language like that, but I've definitely been transparent with candidates before and said, listen, this is the range that I have to work with. And so if you're not happy with that, I can always go back and ask for more. I just can't guarantee that I can get it. So if my range is 80 to 90 and you need 95, I'm not sure if I can do it. And I also have to factor in my other employees, right? So if I give you 95 and someone else has the same skill set as you and they're not at 95, that complicates things for me. So I try to be transparent with them within the constraints. That was primarily when I was working in-house, just because I want to be upfront with people. But I would say, you know, again, trust your gut. If you think that they're sincere and they're coming out of the gate with their best offer, you can still push a little to see where the edges are, but you might take them at their word if you feel like it's something that they're being honest about. And I think we tend to know the areas and the states where that seems more likely, right? The industries. So if it tends to be a more, you know, liberal type of company, they're probably more serious about it, versus maybe one that's not, or is in a place that maybe doesn't seem like it would be that way, and it's more of a tactic. So I would say use your judgment, but unless it's like a shisty recruiter coming out the gate being like, you know, I really went to the ends of the earth for you for this offer, and you know, they're hamming it up, it's like, probably not. So I don't know if that helps at all, but
Yeah, it definitely does. And I know that was like simultaneously a super vague, but also very specific question to ask.
yeah,
But
yeah, no, it's good. It's a good one.
I appreciate your insight there, and definitely some things to cue into, and trusting your gut, and understanding when people are trying to sell in other factors to the offer that don't actually matter.
Absolutely. Yeah, Katie, that's a good point in the chat. You definitely do not have, like, don't ever feel guilty for negotiating, ever, ever, ever. And whatever you have to do, if you need to write it down on a piece of paper and just remind yourself that, you know, you do not need to feel guilty. There's no need to feel guilty. I recently had a client, they got an offer from a healthcare company. They were really happy with the offer. They came to me, they said, I got an offer. This is what they offered. And I said, that seems kind of low. They gave you like the offer at the bottom end of your range. Let's push a little and see if we can get you some more. I said, go back. We talked about a script, went back. They said, here's the number I'd like. Is there some room? You know, how we took the, how can we get to a win? And they went back, they got 5K more. That's 5K more. Now at their next job, they're starting 5K ahead, just in their confidence level. Their next raise, they're already 5K ahead from where they would have been if they hadn't asked, right? So it never hurts to ask. The worst thing they can do is say, no, we don't have any more room. That's the best we can do. Then you know, but you don't ever have to feel guilty about that, ever, 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 ever. Get that money. Get that money. We've been ripped off our whole lives as women. Get the money. Don't apologize for it. Show me the money. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Negotiation is, to some extent, it's expected. Not everybody expects it, but I would say majority of people expect it. So it really depends who you're working with, right? So never hurts to ask. So that's what I got. We want to head into raffle. Is that what's next?
Yeah, we'll go ahead and hand it over to Melissa. But before we do, Caitlin, just thank you again for all of your insight and for sharing with us. I know that the entire community benefits from this. And as we go forth and negotiate offers, we're just helping people even beyond our immediate sphere. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, happy to. Do you want me to tell a little bit about Jacqueline and sort of the book before we turn over to Melissa, or?
Let's do it. Yeah.